I'm not ashamed to hold my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
If your Old Testament's with you, you can turn to the book of Habakkuk. It depends, I guess, on whether you're from Canada or the United States as to how you say this book. I say it's Habakkuk. Others will say it's Habakkuk. Depends how you where you put the emphasis during his name. But this is the 35th book of the Old Testament. The 35th book. We've been going through. I didn't turn that on. We've been going through an overview of the Old Testament. We've been doing it in sections. The first section really was from Genesis all the way, I think it was about to 2 Kings or something like that. First or 2 Chronicles. It was the first 13 books of the Old Testament. That was book 1. Then we took a break from that. We went on and studied something else. Then we came back with book 2, and that started, I think actually it started about 1 Chronicles, and went all the way through the book of Ezekiel. And so we studied the overview of all of those books. And then we took another break. And now come back to book 3 of our study. We're in a book that we're studying from. And it's dealing with Daniel, the last of the major prophets. And then all of our minor prophets. There are 12 books of minor prophets, and they're only minor prophets, not because they're small prophets, or they're insignificant prophets, or important prophets. They're minor prophets because their books are generally shorter than other books. Although, with that being said, some of the books of the minor prophets are actually quite large in comparison. The book of Zechariah, for instance, is longer than the book of Daniel by a number of chapters, and so or at least around the same length. And so we classify Daniel as a major prophet, but Zechariah is a minor one. And it's a way we divide the Bible. And they're not referred to in the Bible as minor prophets, and we should not view them as any less significant than any other prophet, because if you're a prophet from God, that means that God is speaking through you. And the message, therefore, is important that we listen to. And so the people who these prophets were speaking to needed to listen to the message, because they were speaking in the name of the Lord. And so the book of Habakkuk is down here. We are in the final 5 books of the Old Testament. So we have Habakkuk, then we have Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and that will bring us to the end of the Old Testament. I've been here now 4.5 years, and so that's the time it's taken us to get through the Old Testament, and with some breaks off in between. So the book of Habakkuk is generally recognized as the 13th of the 17 Old Testament books of prophecy, and is the 8th, as I said, of the 12 books of minor prophets. Question 1 in our book asks us, how is the style of Habakkuk unique when compared to the other books of the minor prophets? And if you haven't read the book of Habakkuk, you can't answer that question. So what we're going to do is we're going to read Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, 12 to 17, and then chapter 2, verse 1. And what I'd like you to sort of think about, if you've been in these classes before, okay, what was the style of the other books that we have read? Say, Hosea, or Micah, or Jonah, or any of the other books that we have studied so far when it comes to the prophets. And how is that different from what we're going to read in Habakkuk as to how the book is written? And so we will start with Bill. We'll do one verse each. Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. So we'll go to Bill and then Calvin and back. If you don't want to read, that's fine. We'll just go to the next person. Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. And then we'll skip down and do 12 to 17.
One verse?
One verse each, yes.
O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you, violence, and you will not save.
Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises.
Therefore the law is powerless and just never goes forth, for the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, pursue judgment for sin.
And we'll skip down to verse 12. Who wants to read next? I think we'll come up to Annie for a moment. Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 12 through 17. We'll do one verse each. And I'll join the reading when it comes up past Sandy.
Lord, are you
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ian. Go ahead.
Lord, are God from everlasting, my God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my Lord, have ordained them to punish.
We'll come up to Annie.
Your eyes are too pure to behold evil, and you cannot look on wrongdoing. Why do you look on the treacherous and are silent when the wicked is wrong? Those more righteous than we.
You have made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler.
They fear the Lord and give God vacation and get them therefore they be joy and complaint.
Therefore they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous and their food plentiful.
Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity?
And then verse 1, Cal, of chapter 2.
I will stand on my guard post and station myself on the rampart, and I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me, and how I may reply when I am reproved.
All right, so perhaps let's break this question down in case it's not as obvious to how what the question's asking. When we usually think of a prophet, who speaks to who? In relationship with God and man, who usually speaks to who? Bill.
Speaks to man.
God speaks to man. That's what we're used to hearing, is God spoke to Moses, saying, God spoke to Samuel, saying, God spoke to Isaiah, the words of the Lord through the mouth of Jeremiah. All of these things. We don't usually hear a prophet questioning God. We usually hear the prophet just saying, this is what God said. What is Habakkuk doing in the chapter 1, or at least in the sections that we read of chapter 1? What is he doing? Bill.
He's addressing God, speaking to God. He has a complaint, but
Yeah, well, and we'll get into that. But no, in this case, it's not that God's not going to address Habakkuk here. He is, and we skipped the part in chapter 1 where he does. And most of chapter 2 is going to be dealing with that as well. However, Habakkuk is addressing God. We don't usually get those conversations, if there are any, recorded for us. And so, a lot of the times, when we look out into the world, what do we usually say when we look out into the society as a whole? What's the condition of our society?
It's sad.
Why?
It's very sad because we always think that the generation coming up is always worse than our own.
That tends to be an old people's line of thinking, and it never ceases to change. In reality, Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, and it only, I believe, only appears more wicked. It's wicked, and society as a whole is wicked. It's not that righteous people don't exist; they do. Not that people don't worship God; they do that too. But on the whole, you take a look at our society, it's pretty sad conditions. There are a lot of people who don't believe in God. A lot of people who are treating Christians in a poor way, in a terrible way, either persecuting them and killing them, or just doing other things to harm them. And this book really does deal with some of the complaints that even Christians might have, or some of the questions that Christians might have. Have you ever heard someone say, well, if God is so good, why do Christians suffer? Why do his people suffer? Why is it that only evil people seem to be getting ahead in this life? You take a look at a lot of rich people. Some people get rich by stealing from other people. And they don't get caught. And they don't go to jail. Because either the law can't prove that they did it, or because our society is corrupt and won't convict. And so you take a look and say, well, I'm working night and day just to make ends meet, and yet over here, some guy who doesn't believe in God, who curses the name of God, he's living comfortably. He has seemingly everything he desires. And God's not punishing him for being wicked. It's looking like God's blessing him for being wicked. Now, that's not what's happening. But from our vantage point, from our viewpoint, we have those questions. Why do the righteous suffer? Why does it seem that God is not judging the wicked? We have a lack of patience when it comes to the judgment of God. We want, if something bad happens to us, when do we want justice? Immediately. We want someone to be punished right then and there. And if it takes a long time, well then, really, something is wrong. Well, with God, Habakkuk has, we're going to discuss when this book is written in a minute, but Habakkuk's looking out at the world he's living in, and he's seeing wickedness. And it looks like God's not doing anything. But God's doing something, and he's going to tell Habakkuk, I'm doing something. I have plans. I have a will. And you need to trust in me. That's going to be the overall theme of this book, is the just shall live by faith. Paul quotes that in the book of Romans, chapter 1. He is quoting the book of Habakkuk when he says, the just shall live by faith. Why is it that the righteous can live righteously? Because we trust in God to do what God has said he will do. We have faith in God that God will be righteous, that God will be just, that God will judge the wicked, even if it is in his time and not ours. Did you have something, Bill?
Well, you mentioned faith. That's part of our problem. Maybe when we fall away, we all have faith in Christ that he died for us, but then there's a faith that comes only through prayer and constant study, where we have to put things in God's hands.
Yes.
And that's the hard part.
Yes.
Because like you say, we want it now.
Well, it doesn't just involve justice. We want our needs met now.
Yeah.
I want if I have a prayer that I'm praying to God, whatever I'm petitioning God for, I want God to answer now. And I would prefer the answer to be yes and not no. But Christians have to learn to trust in God. That's what faith is. A lot of people think faith is, well, I believe in Christ. Well, a lot of people believe in Christ, but don't trust him for anything. As soon as they get into trouble, well, they might be on their knees praying to God, please get me out of trouble, but in the good times, God's nowhere in their thoughts. They don't trust in God to provide them their food. They don't thank God for the health he provides them, for the jobs that he provides them with for the sunshine and the rain and all the beauty of this earth. Christians need to learn to trust in God. And it's not just a on and off switch. I don't come up out of the waters of baptism and now completely I'm saying, yes, I get it all. I have complete faith in God. No, I have faith enough to obey God. But I do not have complete faith. I have to grow in that. And I will make mistakes along the way. I will have lapses in my faith. You see the apostles all the way through. You say, how did the apostles lack in faith? At any time, they had Jesus. Jesus was teaching them. Jesus was performing miracles. He was healing the sick, raising the dead. How could you not have faith in Jesus when you saw these things? It has to do with trust. They believed who Jesus was, but they didn't have a grounded, firm faith to trust Jesus in not only what he said about going to the cross and dying for our sins, but trusting him to be able to do everything he said he would do. And that has to do with faith. And so Habakkuk is going to have these questions for God. God's going to answer him. And he's basically going to answer him, trust me. I'm God. I'm sitting on the throne. You need to trust me. And so when we get to the title of the book, we're going to be in our section about the origin. We have 3 sections of our overview. We usually have the origin, then we have the purpose, and then we have the content. And so we have those 3 sections. But the first part of dealing with the Old Testament is figure out why is the book called Habakkuk. And so, why is the book called Habakkuk? What's the first verse of Habakkuk say?
The Lord from which Habakkuk the prophet saw.
Yeah, it's named because the prophet's named Habakkuk. That's why the book is named that. A lot of the times, the book is named for the author. Not all the time, but a lot of the times, the book is named for the author, who, the prophet in this case, and all of our prophets, all of the prophetic books are named after the prophet. And so Habakkuk is the name of the book. Does anyone know, if you have your books, maybe you know, and if you have the access to the internet, you may know, what does the name Habakkuk mean? If you don't, I'm not going to hold it against you.
I have the Amplified Version, and it says the oracle, thing to be lifted up.
Okay, I would agree with that. All right, something to be lifted up. Anything else? Any other?
Embrace.
Embrace. Okay, what does it mean to embrace?
Wrap around.
To wrap around. We usually think of a warm embrace, so that's a hug. So in other words, you wrap yourself around. And so the prophet's name probably means embrace, which would seem to signify his work of embracing and comforting the faithful through a message which encourages constant trust in God. And so let's get a couple verses that go along with that would show us that. If we're in Habakkuk 2, we're to Easter. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4.
Behold, be proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith.
All right, that's the Lord speaking. That's not Habakkuk speaking there. That's the Lord speaking. This is the message that Habakkuk would have to embrace, and he would have to teach the people. The just shall live by faith. Ian, you want to get Habakkuk 3? I'll get you to read 17, 18, and 19. Habakkuk 3, 17, 18, and 19. Can you read it? Sorry.
Through the fig tree does not crop, and there are no grapes on the vines.
You and Habakkuk? Oh. Maybe I'm not in Habakkuk 3. Sorry, you're right. I meant to be in Habakkuk 1, 12 to 17. That's my fault. I'm sitting there going, why is it not what I'm wanting it to be? But it's sit there. No. I'll hold off for a second. I've lost my place on my page, which is a problem. This Habakkuk 3. This is the end of the book. Again, we'll start again. Habakkuk 3, verses 17 through 19. And you can start again. We'll try it again. That was my fault. Chapter 3, verses 17 to 19.
Though fig tree does not bear buds, and there are no grapes on the vines, though olive crops fails, forth and the fields produce no fruit, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stables, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of an deer. He enables me to tread on the heights.
All right. This is another message that Habakkuk would have to, not only, this is a hymn. By the way, chapter 3 is a song. It is written as a song, and it can be divided really into two songs. And this is what Habakkuk sings at the end of this book. And he was saying, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor the fruit be on the vines, what would we say that condition of the land would be if that didn't happen?
A drought.
Pardon me?
Like a drought.
Like a drought, yes. And it would cause a famine. It would be a disaster if you're a farmer and you don't have fruit to sell. You're not going to make money, and people are not going to eat. So he said, though the fig tree may not blossom, though the fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the field yield no fruit. Then we come down to verse 3. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Jehovah God is my strength. That takes a lot of faith to be able to say that. A lot of times, it's easy to have faith and trust in God when things are going good. When everything is going the exact way we want. It's much harder to have faith when everything is going bad. When nothing seems to be working. When we have tons and tons and tons of problems. This would be a disaster in the physical conditions. Yet because Habakkuk knew who God was, trusted in God for his salvation, he knew that everything would in the end be fine. May not be physically. He may die. But he's not going to lose the joy that he has in the Lord because of his salvation. He knows that there are better things lying ahead. And he knows that God exists and he will do what he said he will do. And so this is what the prophet would have to embrace and teach the people. And oftentimes in the Old Testament we see names had more significance than we give them today. We typically don't put a lot of... Parents put thought into their kids' names. But they put thoughts into their kids' names that it might have some family significance, might have some sentimental significance. But if you've ever gone and looked up your children's names, the newborn we have here, Benjamin, means son of my right hand. That's what that name means. My sister's name means pleasant. I forget what my name means. It should have. I'll have to look that up and give that to you. I should know what my name means. It's the Lord is my provider or strength or something similar to that. But a lot of the Old Testament names had meanings, and they were often very prophetic when it came to what the person was doing. Parents put a lot of thought in people's names. And so Habakkuk meant embrace. The author of Habakkuk, the opening statement says, Keller, when she read it, said the oracle of Habakkuk, or the burden of Habakkuk. It's the prophecy of Habakkuk. And the opening statement presents the claim that it contains the record of the vision, that's what an oracle or a burden is, that God delivered to Habakkuk. While the latter portion of the book claims to be the work of Habakkuk. In chapter 3, verse 1, I'll read this one so we get it right. In chapter 3, verse 1, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. I've had to look that word up. We'll get to that word when we discuss the song of Habakkuk. But it's a prayer of Habakkuk. The postscript, which is not part of the actual inspired word, instructs the prophet's song to be used in worship. It says, to the chief musician with my stringed instruments. This is an Old Testament book. We need to remember it's an Old Testament book. Instrumental music is not authorized in the New Testament, but it was in Old Testament times. And so we should not view this as anything strange, because it was authorized. And this song would be sung in worship. It would not be a song that would be bad for us to sing in worship, either in full or in paraphrase. If someone wanted to write the music to it, and we sing it, there's no problem with that. We would not use instrumental music, but we could sing the song, because it is a song of faith. It is a song of trusting God. It's not a typical song that a lot of people think of, but it is Habakkuk who wrote it. Now, because this was a prophet song used in worship, it may indicate, that Habakkuk was a Levite who lived in Jerusalem, and because a lot of the songs were written by the Levites for the temple worship. It was anyone not just anyone under the law of Moses could affect the worship of the people. Not anyone could offer sacrifices. Not anyone could lead the people in worship. And so this might suggest. But other than that, other than knowing just that little bit about Habakkuk, we don't know much about the man himself. But we do know that he is extensively quoted in the New Testament, and his verses are. So Habakkuk chapter 2, if you recall, verse 4, said, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. James, do you want to get Romans chapter 1, verse 17? Dion, you want to get Galatians chapter 3, verse 11? We'll come to Henry to get Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38. Romans chapter 1, verse 17.
For therein is the righteousness of God, revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith.
In the New Testament, when you see as it is written, you should be looking for those little numbers beside that verse. That would tell you there's a cross-reference into the Old Testament usually as to where you should be looking. If you have a New King James Version of the Bible and you ever see words written in italics, that's slanty writing, you know that it's being quoted from the Old Testament. And the New King James is very helpful in the New Testament when it comes to that, because you can say, Paul's quoting the Old Testament. Where? And you can go back and read it. Well, when the end of that verse says, as it is written, the just shall live by faith, he's quoting Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Galatians chapter 3, verse 11.
But that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith.
It is evident. What version are you reading, Dion?
King James.
King James, okay. It is evident, or it is written, the just shall live by faith. Paul quotes him again. Paul in Galatians chapter 3 says, you cannot be justified by the law of Moses, because the law of Moses did not have the ability to take away your sin. You cannot fall back to the law of Moses and the 10 Commandments or any stretch of the imagination. We follow the commandments of God, but they're found in the New Testament. Because we can't be saved by the Old Testament. How are we saved? By faith in God. Not faith alone. Working faith in God and trust in His Son, Jesus Christ. And again, Paul applies it in Galatians chapter 3. Henry, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38.
Now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him.
Now again, we have that phrase, the just shall live by faith. This is not likely Paul writing here. But the Hebrew writer is drawing on the Old Testament too. A lot of the New Testament writers draw on the phrases for the Old Testament, because remember, Paul said the Old Testament was there as an example for us, teaching us how God dealt with people before. And the Hebrew writer is very clear in saying that the Old Testament was the shadow of better things in the New Testament. And so if you have an image and you say, well, here's the shadow, you better go discuss what the shadow is talking about, because otherwise you'll never be able to see the image. And so that's why the Hebrew writer is often quoting the Old Testament. And in Hebrews chapter 10, he is quoting the book of Habakkuk again. Any comments before we move on to the date? We're not going to spend a lot of time on the date, but that will finish up this morning's class. And so there are no real clues in this book as to when it is written. Usually in our prophets, the ones that Bill's been doing, it says, this prophet reigned during this king. And we'd be able to go back to 1 Kings or 2 Kings and pinpoint when that was. Or, in the case of Jonah, we knew from 1 Kings when Nineveh overthrew Israel, so we knew it was behind it. In fact, in 1 Kings, you do have a reference to Jonah. And you can come along and say, now I know when the book of Jonah was written, it was during this king. You can't do that with Habakkuk. There is no exact historical marker, and so we cannot attach an exact date. However, certain events that are described within this book provide us a general time frame. And so, I'll get you to read verses 5 to 11 on your own time. We'll maybe get to this a little later on in our study. But you're going to find God prophesying about the rise of the Chaldeans, which are the Babylonians. And he's going to speak of the conquest of Judah as a future event. So we know that this book is written before the exile. So before the end of the book of 1 Kings, this book is written. It is not going to be included in these books that are written after Israel returns from captivity. So we can put that in our mind. I'll get to that question in a minute. It is clear that the book must have been written prior to the Babylonian conquest of Judah, which took place in 605 BC, and that it is likely because you can read verses 2 to 11 of chapter 1. Now, Habakkuk, if you read the book, will describe a situation in Judah in which the rulers are failing to administer justice and instead are oppressing the people. And that's in Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. That's what he's crying about. He's saying, my nation is sinning. They're oppressing the people, and God's doing nothing about it. And if we were to examine the book of 2 Kings, we would find that such a description would appear to fit the time immediately after the death of Josiah, who was Judah's last good king, who died in 609 BC. Therefore, it is most likely that Habakkuk delivered his message sometime around 608 to 607 BC, before the Babylonian captivity, during the early part of the reign of King Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Again, that's a likely date. Here's the divided kingdom. We'll be talking about that in this morning's lesson. Israel was conquered by Assyria in 722, and Judah was conquered by Babylon in 586. So somewhere in here is the message of Habakkuk. And that will get us a time frame for where we're actually talking. Any comments or questions before we close this morning? Next week then we will take up the purpose of Habakkuk. We'll be looking at the historical purpose, the doctrinal purpose, and of course how this book relates to Jesus Christ.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor